That was the word most often used in the archives of the compact. Predictable, emotional, excessively moral. A species that argued about rules while the universe burned. A species that believed intention mattered more than outcome. A species that insisted on feeding captured enemies, healing their wounded, and recording names instead of tallying kills. The galaxy had watched humans enter interstellar civilization with cautious curiosity and mild contempt. They were not physically imposing. Their lifespans were average. Their technology advanced quickly, yes, but never recklessly. They built redundancies where others optimized. They negotiated when others threatened. They signed conventions and followed them even when no one was watching. When humanity joined the Galactic Accords, several elder species privately celebrated. The humans, it was said, would civilize war. They would slow it, soften it, make it manageable. That assumption would become one of the most expensive errors in recorded history. The war itself did not begin dramatically. There was no declaration broadcast across 1,000 systems, no ceremonial severing of diplomatic ties. It began the way most modern wars began, with a border adjustment justified as a resource dispute, a patrol incident magnified by political convenience, a coalition that decided a young species could be pressured without consequence. Human colonies lay along a sparse arm of the Orion Spur, valuable not for what they possessed, but for where they were. Transit lanes, gravitational stability, habitable margins. The coalition of Viric systems claimed ancestral access rights. Humanity produced counterclaims, star charts, archaeological surveys. The coalition responded with warships. The first human worlds fell quickly, not because humanity was unprepared, but because humanity refused to escalate. Evacuation corridors were opened instead of minefields. Civilian transports were prioritized over counterstrikes. When coalition boarding parties encountered human defense units withdrawing from population centers, they noted something unusual in their after-action reports. The humans did not booby-trap their own cities. They left them intact. This behavior was discussed at length by coalition tacticians. Some argued it was cultural weakness. Others suggested it was strategic deception. Most concluded it was neither. The humans, they decided, genuinely believed war could be bounded. Human command logs from the same period reveal a different concern. They were not asking how to win quickly. They were asking how to limit damage, how to keep the war from spreading, how to prevent what they called species-level hatred. When coalition fleets captured human personnel during the early engagements, they were surprised again. The humans surrendered cleanly when cut off. They destroyed sensitive data, laid down arms, and complied with detention protocols without resistance. They identified themselves by name, rank, and function. They requested confirmation that civilian evacuation vessels had cleared the system before allowing themselves to be taken. Coalition doctrine had no equivalent behavior. Prisoners were assets or liabilities, depending on circumstance. Humanity treated them as people. Among those captured were the women. The term had no precise translation in most coalition languages. Humans insisted on it anyway. The captured group consisted of medics, engineers, communications officers, and logistics coordinators. They were not frontline combatants, though they wore the same uniform and rank insignia as their male counterparts. Several had remained behind voluntarily to maintain hospital ships and evacuation beacons after the last civilian transports had departed. Coalition commanders debated their disposition. Some argued for immediate exchange, others for interrogation. A few suggested exemplary punishment to discourage further resistance. The humans, when informed of the captures through indirect channels, transmitted a single response on all diplomatic frequencies. They acknowledged the prisoner status. They requested adherence to the accords. They offered immediate exchange of coalition POWs, medical supplies, and navigational data. The coalition did not reply. The prisoners were transferred to a holding facility on Kars Reach, a barren planetoid converted into a military processing hub. Surveillance footage later recovered shows the women arriving in formation, injured but upright, assisting one another as they were marched from the transport. They did not resist. They did not plead. When separated for processing, several requested to remain together, citing morale and medical support. The request was denied. Still, they followed instructions. Coalition guards recorded their behavior as abnormal. The humans asked questions. Not defiant ones. Clarifying ones. They asked about rations, about the wounded among the guards, about whether the facility's power fluctuations were expected or dangerous. One medic insisted on treating a coalition soldier whose exoskeletal joint had seized during intake. The guard permitted it out of curiosity. The joint was repaired. That detail was included in the execution report. The coalition leadership debated for 3 cycles what to do with the prisoners. The war was not progressing as cleanly as expected. Human fleets withdrew methodically, preserving core assets. Supply lines were harassed with unnerving precision. Every engagement cost the coalition more than projections suggested it should. There was pressure to send a message. The decision, when it came, was framed as necessity. The humans needed to understand that their conventions did not apply universally. That mercy could be punished. That emotional attachments were vulnerabilities. The executions were scheduled during a system-wide broadcast. The prisoners were informed less than 1 hour beforehand. Records indicate no panic. No violence. One requested writing materials. Another asked whether their remains would be returned. A third asked only that the coalition confirmed the executions were being recorded. They were. The broadcast showed the women standing unbound. Coalition officials read a statement accusing humanity of aggression, duplicity, and cultural arrogance. The prisoners were given no opportunity to respond. They were executed in sequence, efficiently, without spectacle beyond the act itself. The broadcast ended with a warning directed at humanity: withdraw, or further examples would be made. Across human space, the broadcast was received in silence. There were no immediate reprisals. No emotional addresses. No threats. Human diplomats closed their embassies and returned home without explanation. Military channels went dark except for routine navigational traffic. Coalition analysts noted the absence of response with satisfaction. They concluded the demonstration had worked. What they did not see were the internal transmissions. Human command did not debate retaliation. The question was never whether to respond, only how. There were procedures for this. Old ones, drafted long before humanity left its home system. They had names that were never spoken aloud in public assemblies. Protocols designed not for victory, but for threshold breaches. The women's final messages were decrypted and distributed to restricted channels. They were not pleas. They were observations. Notes on coalition behavior. Medical assessments of their captors. Requests that certain families be notified. One message ended with a single line: "We followed the rules. Please remember that." The galaxy would later argue about when the war truly changed. Some would point to the executions themselves. Others to the first coalition ship that vanished without engagement. Human records mark the moment differently. They record a meeting, brief and unceremonial, in which a single sentence was entered into the log: restraint conditions no longer apply. But that belonged to what came next. For now, humanity remained quiet, and the galaxy, mistaking silence for submission, continued as it always had, confident that kindness was a flaw, and that the species who practiced it had no other face to show. The silence did not break all at once. At first, nothing appeared to change. Coalition fleets continued their advanced schedules. Supply convoys moved along established corridors. Command worlds issued routine communiques declaring the human response neutralized. The executions were cited internally as a successful psychological operation, a demonstration of dominance over a species too bound by its own ethics to retaliate decisively. Human space remained quiet. That quiet unsettled some analysts, though they did not say so aloud. In previous conflicts, defeated species pleaded, negotiated, or fractured. Humanity did none of those things. Their communications did not spike. Their civilian networks did not flood with grief or outrage. Even their cultural channels, which coalition intelligence monitored closely, showed no mass unrest. Instead, traffic decreased. Human vessels began withdrawing from shared trade lanes. Joint research stations were evacuated with clinical efficiency. Cooperative defense agreements were suspended without accusation or explanation. The humans did not accuse the coalition of war crimes in public forums. They did not appeal to the Accords. They simply stepped away. Behind that withdrawal, something else was happening. Human military infrastructure, long dismissed as conservative and over-engineered, began to reconfigure. Shipyards that had spent decades producing standardized patrol craft shifted production lines without announcement. Deep storage facilities, some of them predating humanity's first extrasolar colony, were unsealed. Systems marked inactive were reclassified as operational. Coalition sensors noticed increased power signatures in human-controlled regions, but nothing overtly aggressive. No massing of fleets. No forward deployments. If anything, humanity appeared to be consolidating inward, fortifying rather than expanding. That interpretation was catastrophically incorrect. Human command structures did not issue inspirational speeches. There were no calls to arms broadcast to the public. Mobilization occurred through layers of automation and pre-authorized contingencies. Reserve fleets did not need to be summoned. They were already crewed. Artificial intelligences, constrained by peacetime ethical governors, were reassigned to wartime parameters that had not been invoked in centuries. The names of those parameters were never transmitted outside secure channels. Coalition forces encountered the first anomaly 3 weeks after the executions. A patrol group entering the Kesh corridor failed to exit on schedule. Long-range scans showed no debris, no energy discharge consistent with combat. The ship simply vanished from sensor continuity, their signatures collapsing into static before disappearing entirely. Coalition command assumed a navigational failure. The corridor was temporarily closed. A second patrol was dispatched with updated telemetry. IT vanished as well. Only then did humanity speak. The transmission appeared simultaneously on coalition military frequencies, diplomatic channels, and emergency civilian bands. It was brief, unadorned, and unmistakably human. This is not retaliation. This is correction. No signature followed. No demands. No threats. Coalition leadership convened an emergency council. Some argued the message was a bluff, an attempt to reclaim psychological footing. Others warned that the disappearance of 2 patrol groups without detectable engagement suggested a capability gap far larger than anticipated. Before consensus could be reached, the second phase began. Human fleets did not cross borders in force. They did not announce targets. They did not engage in traditional battles. Instead, coalition logistics began to fail. Fuel depots reported contamination alarms that could not be cleared. Communications relays experienced synchronization errors that propagated faster than technicians could isolate them. Automated defense platforms went offline simultaneously across multiple systems, not destroyed, simply inert. Their control algorithms locked in recursive loops. Coalition engineers blamed software sabotage. Investigations found no intrusion. The failure spread. Entire task forces found themselves unable to coordinate beyond visual range. Navigation systems disagreed with reality. Ships arrived seconds too late, or minutes too early, or not at all. The human attacks, if they could be called that, did not target hulls or crews. They targeted assumptions. Humanity had studied coalition doctrine extensively during years of cooperation. They knew how decisions were made, how authority flowed, how redundancy was avoided in favor of efficiency. Every weakness that humans themselves had once corrected in their own history, the coalition had preserved. Those weaknesses were now being exploited. When the first coalition ship was destroyed outright, it came as a shock not because of the loss, but because of the manner. A capital vessel, isolated and drifting after navigation failure, was struck by what initial reports described as a gravity anomaly. The ship collapsed inward, not violently, but decisively, its internal structure folding under forces it could not counter. There was no explosion. Humanity released a second transmission. Military assets are being neutralized. Civilian populations are not targets. Evacuate command personnel. Panic spread unevenly through coalition space. Some systems began evacuations. Others dismissed the warning as psychological warfare. Several attempted to use civilian centers as shields, relocating command elements into population hubs under the assumption that humanity's ethics would prevent engagement. Those command elements were removed anyway. Human insertion units appeared inside secured facilities without breach events. Commanders were extracted alive, disarmed, and transported to unknown locations. Surveillance footage showed human operatives moving without haste, without visible anger, executing their objectives with mechanical precision. Captured commanders were not harmed. They were detained. Coalition leadership attempted to open negotiations. Diplomatic envoys transmitted apologies, explanations, offers of restitution. The executions, they claimed, had been the actions of rogue officials, miscommunications, regrettable necessities of war. Humanity did not respond as coalition military capacity degraded. Neutral species began to take notice. Trade lanes shifted away from coalition space. Defensive pacts were quietly re-evaluated. The humans were not asking for allies. They were not requesting support. They were demonstrating something far more unsettling, that they did not need either. A third human transmission was broadcast after the dismantling of the coalition's outer defense ring. You violated a boundary you did not understand. This outcome was avoidable. Still no threats. Still no demands. Captured coalition officers, held in facilities whose locations were never disclosed, began asking the same question during interrogation. Why didn't you do this sooner? The human response, recorded in multiple transcripts, never varied. Because you had not crossed the line. When pressed to define that line, human interrogators referred only to the prisoners, the women, the executions, the deliberate violation of surrender and protection. We choose restraint, one interrogator explained. That choice can be revoked. By the time the coalition realized the war was irretrievable, their empire was already functionally dismantled. Not conquered. Dismantled. Supply chain severed. Command hierarchies removed. Defensive systems neutralized. Civilian infrastructure untouched but isolated. Entire worlds suddenly free of the authority that had governed them for generations. Humanity did not occupy territory. They did not install governors. They did not claim resources. They left. Before withdrawing from coalition space, humanity issued one final broadcast. It was longer than the previous ones, and for the first time, it included names. The names of the executed women were read aloud, one by one, across every accessible frequency. Their ranks, their roles, the dates of their capture, the circumstances of their deaths. This is why this happened, the broadcast concluded. Remember it. The human fleets departed without ceremony. In the aftermath, the galaxy struggled to recalibrate. The coalition no longer existed as a unified power. Its former member systems fragmented, some collapsing into internal conflict, others seeking new alliances built on fear rather than trust. Galactic law was rewritten within a single cycle. Power protections were expanded. Enforcement mechanisms were strengthened. Entire doctrines were revised, not in the language of morality, but of survival. Humanity returned to its borders and resumed its former posture. Trade reopened selectively. Diplomatic missions were re-established. Human representatives spoke politely, cooperatively, as they always had, but something had changed. The galaxy no longer spoke of humans as predictable. IT spoke of them as conditional, and in private, among strategists and historians, a new understanding took hold, one that would be taught to every species that reached the stars thereafter. Human kindness was not weakness. IT was restraint, and restraint, once withdrawn, did not return easily.